There's this kind of arresting quality that can happen when we're presented with something that is askew our routine.
Allow me to give you some context to this truly inspiring conversation I had with Brian Alexander, or Trace Bloom, as you might know him from the online space. Brian Alexander is an industrial designer, but he's also an artist, and he combines these two practices in a very interesting way to create instruments that you do not really expect to see. He inspires us to look at instruments in a complete different way, and he had just won the second prize of the Gutmann Experimental Music Instrument contest. He also has permanent works at MoMA and a bunch of other museums, and over 25 patents under his name. There are many nuggets of wisdom in this conversation that goes fairly deeply into philosophy of what it is to design instruments or to play anything that produces sound or visuals, and what are these boundaries between art and industrial design. This is the Synth Design Podcast, where we talk about synth design. I'm Roy, and this is Brian Alexander, Trace Bloom. I know you now as Brian, but we all know you online as Trace Bloom. So what is Trace Bloom?
So Trace Bloom is kind of an overall descriptor or blanket description or adjective of the activity and process of perceiving things in the world, natural phenomena usually, not always, could be machine based, and lightly tracing that, sort of literally, and then the translation to allowing something to bloom or become its own organic expression based on what's done in the middle, the translation part. So there's the perception, there's the activity that I'm concerned with most in the middle, and then there's what will happen. Will it be color? Will it be light? Will it be sound? What will it mean to people when we perceive it? So it's kind of a descriptor in a way for
Yeah.
what I pursue.
Yeah, it seemed like a very conceptual view of your creative process almost.
Yes, yes. I mean, it sort of sounds like a person's name, but it's more intended to say like, yeah, the process that's involved, and that way I kind of look back at other projects or one-off instruments and say like, did this does this still fit? Am I charting to track a new way, or this perceiving nothing but it's expressing something? How is that possible? You know, it just then I have something to play off of. It's more not just like, oh, I feel like doing this. It's I like some mix of structure and a little bit not so much structure at all. So it's that kind of blend.
Yeah, yeah. And all the structure goes on this huge white wall in the back of you.
Yeah, yeah, that's part of it definitely. If I didn't keep putting things there, they would be lost.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I know the feeling. So when I'm looking at your work, it seems like first of all it's like art pieces, but at the
Mm,
same time it feels like engineering pieces, and it's almost a bit confusing to like understand where is this coming from? How are these being realized?
yes, yeah, and in other work, uh, client-based work, it's always more framed in to there's a question and you work within a framework.
Hmm.
When do my own explorations, it what would I say? There's basically a large width that I like to be involved in. So I have an idea, say, for a specific quality of sound, and then I would pursue the device or the circumstance that would make that, and then that turns into possibly other permutations, which might be video. You might act it out. It might be spoken word. It could be a painting. It could be any number of things. And I will try to do as many as I possibly can
Hmm.
across those bounds. Because my background is originally, so I'm an industrial designer
Hmm.
by school and by my profession. But I spent uh, equal times in my life and in school in fine arts, in the very kind of open-ended world of expression uh, around the yeah, just the fine art field. And I always blend those. So sometimes I will build something that will become almost just a statement on a quality or perception or something about the world, but
Hmm.
it will be in product form. So that's especially in the online world, that's confusing. You look at, I show something and people are like, "That's cool. Where'd you get it?" And I'm like, "Well, that's the only one there is. I just made that one." Um,
Yeah.
and then like, what's its purpose? Well, it's to point out the fact that people are habitual creatures and da 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 da. It has a big narrative, and they're like, "Well, how is that a product?" I'm like, "Well, maybe it's not a product," and so it goes back and forth. So that is kind of a Trace Bloom thing. That world is weaving together these experiences that blend uh, kind of the language and the methodology of product development into it, but in like an art format. So there
Mm.
may only be one of something, and it's very not like a can opener at all. It's not classically product oriented. It may be like an enabler or something you deal with that changes your interaction with a device, and it's like, well, is this a product? And maybe not. And that blurriness makes it kind of hard to have a conversation about because it seems that it maybe crosses one too many lines, or it blends lines that I think once we're all on the same page, it's great. I
Mm.
mean, I see it in the world every day. I'm interpreting it that way anyway. I mean, that people may have not intended it, but sometimes there's very poetic, very amazing things that happen in the world that may have been product driven or not. It's always starts from a different point.
I think it's something that we see quite often, that people expect to put things inside boxes,
Yes. Yeah.
and if they can't put it in a box, they get confused. And the more
Yep.
you go into the abstract, the meta, the more, like, when you start studying art, then all of a sudden you realize there are no lines. I
Yes.
remember when I was a kid, I was like really into grunge music, and
Mhm.
everything that was not. I can't even remember a conversation I had with a guitarist that we were talking, and he was like, "Yeah, but I'm going to get you into blues," and I was like, "No, even when I get older, I'm going to play only grunge music. This is it."
Right.
And then he got me into blues, and I stopped listening to grunge, and I started to listen to only Robert Johnson from 1936 to 38, and
Nice.
nothing out of this space was allowed in my room, which was really
Yeah.
funny, because
Yes.
my brother was listening to trance music in the other rooms, who was like really clashing for people going outside of the of the street.
Right. Right. That's great.
But yeah, but when you grow, then you all of a sudden realize that it's really hard to pinpoint things, and then people still try, like on Pitchfork, for instance, if you or Spotify, you look at music genres, and they're all
Yeah.
like, it's like a cluster of genres that people try to put into, like, this is minimal brass techno inspired by this and that. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay, do you really have to put a name to this? And like, yeah,
Right.
marketing
Right.
wise, you need, but
Yeah. Sure. Sure. It is interesting. I feel one of the things that happened, or you remind me of, is that early on in some of the well, this has been many years now, but early on in product development or doing that professionally, um, I became more interested in human behavior and
mm,
how people process and understand the world, and why they seem to every day, every few minutes, say one thing and then do something else, or do
mm,
something else and say they didn't do it, or something. That weird tension I was super intrigued by, and so I've stayed. Well, I'm not like an expert or anything at it, but I just basically stayed in touch with that. I read white papers. I stay in contact with neuroscience and all the shifts in behavioral kind of work around ergonomics and cognitive ergonomics and that,
mm,
because it's amazing what that will drive, or not drive, but just relate to uh, product development and how we perceive art. Like, what people see a piece and they're like, oh, it's minimal this, like you just mentioned with the genres of music, and it's like a very human need to quantify. And it's almost like if we quantify things, if we keep putting labels on things, it kind of takes our anxiety down a couple of notches,
mm,
even though it's like making dinner or something. It's like in an hour or two, it won't taste like that or smell like that anymore. But at that time we called it this, and we all agreed that we would consume it, and it was sort of like a social pact. We did it, dinner's over, and on the one hand, could remember it for months. On the other hand, you may have no idea it even happened. You could forget the next day what you made for dinner.
Mm.
And so it seems like it's almost like a movie frames, like stop action movie where we say this and then later we do the opposite, and then the next day we do what we said we did, and then it's like I find that amazing. So whenever I'm working on products or specific products, commercial products, I should say, versus some of these more exploratory efforts. The exploratory efforts are so open-ended that you get to play with the full range of sense perception, the kind of inherent flaws, I guess, in human behavior. If you call them flaws, I don't. I think it is just human behavior. It's just
Yeah.
what it is, and and then it isn't like you leverage them. You just become aware of them, and you go, okay, so that's that. And it's interesting to your point earlier because then you don't label them anymore. You just go, and you
Yeah.
move on to the next thing, and then somebody will say, well, is it this or this? And you're like, yes, I don't know how to. There's no answer. There's not a direct answer for that. What do you think it is? Which fits more like generally in the art world. Although the fine art world is so structured
Mm.
and kind of looks down on craft in a
Mm.
way.
Mm.
There's a weird biases built into that
Super
too.
weird. Super
Yeah,
weird.
I don't even understand them. I'm like, well, I'm just over here making things. You let me know if you're interested, because I can't begin to process what's going on and why people get so edgy about certain things. I mean, to me, it's all interesting. It's all fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
okay,
There was actually an artist that just my partner is an art historian, so she just showed me an article where they said that an artist sold an art piece that does not exist. It's
ah,
emptiness, and
okay,
he sold it for like 18,000 euros or something like that.
nice.
It's nothing,
Yes.
and he sold nothing for 18,000 euros.
It's a statement in and of itself.
Yeah.
I love that. It reminds me when ready-mades were a thing, and the fact that they have a term called ready-mades. Some
Mm.
people would say, you just bought a fork and sold it to me for $20,000. And they'd say, no, this fork is symbolic of,
Yeah.
or whatever, implies the following things, which is not untrue. And there it is. I don't know. Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
I I was always drawn to craftsmanship. And
Yeah.
when it comes with concept, when you see that there is depth and context to it, then it blows my mind when I see these kind of things.
Yeah, me too.
And I want to stop talking myself. So I'm curious to see your context. So
Sure.
if like the uh, let's just look at what's on your bench at the moment.
Okay, sure. Sure. Let
Like,
me,
what are you working on at the moment? Is it like a sculpture or a music piece, or like what is it?
yes. It is all of that.
It's yes.
Yes, I'm going to switch his camera. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Um, oops. Where are we? So, well, that's the rest of my wall. But so in general, this is the workspace, my brain on the whiteboard. This is the audio workstation, which is sort of fixed. Although if the camera was on the other side, you'd see it's always in pieces because I keep changing my mind for how it's structured. It's
Mm-mm.
like 90% Eurorack componentry, but then there's things that I made combined with that. Um, and it's kind of always in flux. Over here, well, that's a storage area in the back, and then over here is a few things. So that's the solder bench, kind of small things area. Some things on the wall there, other instruments. This in the middle is a piece that's been ongoing, which is aimed at basically taking all your information you're dealing with, like if you have like the Eurorack, that kit that's behind you to your, it would be your left, I guess,
Mhm.
over your shoulder. So I started thinking that there's all this graphical information, and since we're wired as humans to be primarily visually oriented, that uses 2/3 of our brain, some say. Um, that, and we're looking at the back of it here. I apologize, it isn't turned around, but that has 49 patch points, and it's a grid of lighted elements that change with your proximity to them. The cone of projection changes relative to where you're standing. And what you do is you patch out you tap your points that you have in your kit, and it unifies that in a graphic expression. So as opposed to looking at, say, one manufacturer makes their modules one way and one creates them another way, and the lights are different colors and the in and
Mhm.
out points. Sometimes they have a halo around them, and other times you're like, is this the in or the out? Or, oh, I guess it's both.
Mhm.
This takes them all collectively and puts them onto a graphic format. It's roughly 4 feet by 4 feet.
You
Um,
have some pictures of this online, right? Maybe you can
yes,
share your
yeah.
screen to show it.
There it goes. Okay, so sorry, this is all just, I like that non-woven material a lot. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
so
it's part
this,
of the creation. Also, the yeah,
yeah, I didn't.
documentation process becomes part of the creation.
Yeah, I didn't used to do that very well. I didn't document things very well at all. I would build things completely, and they would end up in a box, or I'd
Mm.
set them on fire or something. And I never recorded, and I never did anything. And now the online thing is so interesting because at first I kind of resented it. It spent so much time. Yeah, you just used to be focused on the piece, whatever that is.
Mm.
That you get to an endpoint, and like back in the day, you would, set up a light and a thing and take like four 35 millimeter slides and call it good. And now it's just like, okay, well, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, like a cooking show.
Mm.
But it is kind of interesting because you find the art or the beauty in the process, which I guess maybe I wasn't paying complete attention to. I don't know. So then this is right. This is that non-woven material, which was an exploration of how the light hit those points of projection. There's one in the back corner. I don't know if you can see that back here.
To give this a bit of context, is this that huge wall that you showed
Yeah,
before?
yeah. These are each. So I 3D printed basically came up with the geometry. Sorry, I'm gonna have to get out of this now. This is the kinetic version.
Mm-hmm.
So once I built uh, the frame structure. This was one of the pieces that I wanted to work with, which is purely acoustic. And it balances on 2 points opposed from each other, and the wind moves it. So I'm not
Beautiful.
touching it. It's just the wind tipping it.
But this is not what you said with the patch points.
This is the same structure
Yeah.
with these kinetic elements, where what is now patch points for lighting elements. So that's the overall form. Um, but now it has
So
those
you're
those
basically transforming
yeah,
your art pieces. This was this, and now it's this thing that's
yes,
connect. That's connect. So the only thing that stayed is the cuts, and then you replace these cuts
yes,
with these 3D prints.
yes, yep, yeah. And each one has a single LED
Mm.
that is it basically looks at CV and makes a few interpretations as the voltage range peaks, or if you send an envelope, say, or you basically start playing with the texture of the voltage, the lights react differently,
Mm.
and because they're all in one form, or they're all sort of put together in one component, almost like a little readout screen, except it's big. Um, the more you play and interact, and this happens in your presence, the more you start to correlate the information that at first doesn't look like information. It starts to sort of in your mind map the correlation between those points of expression and what you're doing. And it actually, I've used it long enough now to know that it's influenced my patches. It's influenced the way I work, because I'll let something go, say, and walk, because your rec, it has a mind of its own, and it
Mm.
will do
Of
things.
course.
And so just kind of let something go, walk away for an hour, and come back, and I have a better sense of what has evolved by the graphic information as I do by my ear. Um, and you piece those together, and to me, or the idea is that it gives depth and a common sort of patterning to what you're doing with your patches. Um, as as opposed to, or in addition to, the information you already have with all your kit anyway. So it's basically just like giving depth to it, and it's a concept. I may get to this point and go, kind of, sort of, and then change it again, and the idea of converting it from one piece to another and saving that structure, it may become yet another one. Although I like this one a lot, I may leave it like this and make another one that's different. But um, it, I should say that process is something that I try to do with all the instruments. So they all have some commonality in either control voltage or MIDI in language form. And there's some other experimental things, but basically I try to keep them where they will talk to each other. They're not their own thing. And even things that are acoustic kind of fit in a certain framework, so to speak, if they have trigger elements, or if they output other data. Um, and they are all commonized as though they were products. I mean, they are and they aren't. But like everything has a common camera mount. Everything has a common base. There's common proportions. So the next thing I make fits into, it may not look like it, but it fits into sort of a structural schema, so that if I want to take those parts and have them speak to, say, the clock, I don't know if you saw the clock radio, or the alarm clock that it turned into a sequencer. It's
I
like,
did, but I would love to see this on the screen.
okay, that would, like right now, sitting over there, that element is, without any Eurorack at all, is sending sequences to the display board, which doesn't have a name. But that's what's that's what's happening. So it's outputting. You get a sense of what it's like. If you've heard what it does, then you look at the light image and you say, like, those are related.
Yeah.
There's no audio. It's totally silent, and I'm just going to let it go for a day or so and see what happens. See, just let it run, so to speak. So this little guy
Yeah.
is, or was, a little. An alarm clock, really. So, this was just an experiment to take. I don't do a lot of this, but I do it some with my kids. We do circuit bending projects because I think for younger people, anybody really, I guess, when you reference an existing object and then kind of reformat or rethink what its abilities are, even if it's something that isn't even electronic, just it's like, oh, it does this and it does this. And it has, you kind of see you read the possibilities into the world and into products in a way that doesn't seem so confining. Like, instead of running into I think we all get in the habit of, oh wow, problem, and then your go-to might be to, like, I don't know, purchase the answer or go look on Amazon or something. And it's like, well, there's probably 20 different things you could do before you got to that step. And it's just sort of like a lost, kind of like the craftsmanship thing, a little bit like a lost activity. You see things that aren't refined. It's like great for figuring stuff out, but then you see, like, well, why can't this go the extra mile to kind of receive the effort or the love, so to speak, of making it, just finish it out as an idea, as an object, even if you're never going to make another one. Just finish the one you have. To me, it's like a level of completeness around things. It's not mandatory, of course. Like, some things you just mock up with tape and glue and you go, good enough. But that's usually a step to going somewhere, not the end. So this was along the lines of circuit bending, which we don't do a lot of, but I was thinking that a standard, inexpensive alarm clock, was interesting in that it has a feature set that extends kind of beyond our lifetimes when you think about it. On the one hand, it's a very ordinary object that nobody gives any thought to. And because of the way the character display works, I basically rearranged it so it would make things you didn't necessarily recognize, besides it being in the vertical format. And
You're getting a hum again.
There is a huge, the yard service is like 2 houses down from here. It will go away because there's only a thin strip of grass. As soon as it's done, it'll go away.
Okay. Yeah,
Should
sorry.
we wait, or should we?
No, it's good. Just go ahead. It's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, I started thinking of it as like almost like I called it an Earth sequencer because time is based on living on this particular planet. Time is different other places, but here it's like, well, this is how many times you see the sun. This is how the Earth moves around the sun and an ellipse, and all the kind of planetary big world effects that we experience and that life is driven by here. We have this interesting little ordinary device that kind of tracks that. So I went with one that had temperature as well. So it has a temperature sensor and the date, which means it will go until it runs out of. I mean, we'll all be dead. It could be still going. And of course, the character changes every 12 hours. It repeats itself every 12 hours, but there's the AM and PM little annotation or the little dot. So I use that little bit of information to alter what the next set of characters will look like as it
Mm.
happens. So basically, it's just taking the character data and outputting that as CV. So it's like a peculiar long range sequencer drone kind of device. And again, it's just like it's an experiment, it's an idea more so than a product, but it ends up looking in a product form because I like to finish things to that level.
Yeah, I think the level of craftsmanship is really rewarding to look at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks. Thanks. It
So do you have a picture of how this looked before?
uh
Maybe.
yes. I believe there's one in here that shows the guts. What made it accessible is there was like a little daughter board that came off the side of it that went to the display, and I'm like, oh, easy, you know. So all the contacts and everything were just laying there, and I thought, well, I don't know, just play with it and see. And it seemed like the more I played with it, the more interesting it got, which is why it just in the tinkering, became the idea of a sequencer.
Yeah.
Just sometimes you just take things apart to take them apart, and then you're like, okay, cool, and shoop, or recycle them or upcycle them. But
Yeah.
that's, it's a thought.
I wanted to talk to you about ergonomics. I know that you ran a workshop about ergonomics, and
Yes. Yeah.
and in particular how you see ergonomics as part of art.
Mm,
Because one could look at art as like, yeah, you don't really need ergonomics here. Ergonomics is for stuff that people are supposed to work with,
yeah.
like
Yeah.
functional things, while art is maybe different.
Yeah. Yeah. It. Yeah. That's a very good point. I think when we say ergonomics, people think about the physical side of it,
Mm,
not the cognitive or the processing or the blend. Like what's the you don't really take your head off and put it on a table at night. It's like all this stuff is connected all the time.
mm,
So there's things we perceive and they come through as physical expression, and there's things that the body will see and our conscious mind won't, and that comes out as maybe a thought or all that stuff is cross-wired. So I tend to try to not ever take those apart. And then on the art side, there's always an interesting tension between an emotive quality that something will have. Things feel kind of like, oh, I didn't, I my brain is giving me interesting signals because I have not seen, uh, you know, 50 little cans of soup with these little flames in them and along this edge of this water is like not something I've seen. And so there's this kind of arresting quality that can happen when we're presented with something that is askew our routine or our
yeah.
cadence, our life cadence, and then interesting, those become um, it's episodic kind of data. I mean, you saw that and it kind of went like the perception that you were having at the time, because we're all sort of like living multi-track beings. And so if you were eating something or going around a turn or seeing something new at the same time you saw that, you'll be able to reference that in your mind much further, much longer. Um, and it will take basically everything else that was happening perceptually and combine that into like this little node in time that you can reference. And I think good art gets at something that's sort of beyond words and beyond description. I think good design does the same thing,
Mhm.
but knowing how those, or having a sense anyway, of how those work for people, uh, you can kind of lend a utility to art that isn't just like, well, I was having a bad day, so here's a picture of me angry, with like scratchy things. It's like, yep, seen that. Um, but we don't want to have a bad day too. Like what is now what kind of thing? Because
Mm.
a lot of pieces are posed as some sort of as a venting almost, and then other pieces I always try to be more constructive, which is why I'm always in and out of this land of like, is this a product, or is this, what is the point of what we're looking at, or this is making me feel something, I think I should go try this, or something like, is there any inspirational element, does it call people, does it wake up something in people at a deeper level that is outside that episodic routine? And I think the work can do that. Anyone's work can do that, whether
Yeah.
intentional or otherwise. But on the ergonomic side, that blends to the cognitive. Um, I think there's all kinds of possibilities there in terms of improvement, in terms of well-being, in terms of uh, people gaining perspective or space in their daily lives. Like good art, if you go to an exhibit and wander around a while, you kind of lose track of time,
Mhm.
and you're immersed in something usually unfamiliar with or roughly familiar with, but it touches us in a way, and that is kind of traditionally or classically void in utilitarian objects. One, because they're utilitarian objects, you deal with them all the time, and it's like that's not this isn't how that's going to work. But uh, that you can bridge between those, that can be played back and forth, and I think in the long run, kind of do more meaningful work, I guess, which is some days all I'm trying to do.
Yeah. So how would you describe ergonomics in like you said that you're working also for clients.
Mm,
Uh, can you share a bit uh, um, how the different practices inspire one another?
mm. So let's see. I would say that the ergonomics, in the sense that, or at least in terms of the way I try to focus and bring that into development in the traditional sense, is to be more in alignment with the natural behavior that humans portray on a daily basis. Not so much the mm, so this is dicey, so this will have to probably be cut up. But part of, sometimes I'm dealing with folks where they say this is the newest, coolest version of this, and I say this is really not great for people. I'm thinking this, but I'm not saying and so I have a bit of a conflict. I say, I don't, marketing wise, I would not say that that's what this is doing, because it's just perpetuating bad behavior, kind of thing. Or it's not growing us as a culture, it's not
Mhm.
making better people in the world, it's just selling stuff.
Mhm.
And so I'm sharing that because that is one level of awkwardness that doesn't really benefit from. I mean, it could benefit from predictive behavior, or things on a behavioral side, behavioral ergonomics, but it's not being put to good use. Because my goal with a lot of those efforts is to sort of make the device disappear, so that it's almost frictionless. Like the device has a lot of what we see. Back to the art museum trip, you go and you say, "Oh, that is a thing of beauty. I have not seen that before," and you have this response. So, but from there on in life and in its use, it will sort of evaporate. It will become, you won't get new info. It's not updated perceptually, unlike a family member or something who ages over time. It's like it's just the thing. You'll
Mhm.
only get alerted when it quits working or not doing what you thought it did. So it will sort of, from a perceptual standpoint, you get conditioned to it, and it kind of disappears. If it was in alignment with a base set of behaviors, which I call that ergonomics, um, then the sort of uptake and it disappearing in a good way is all the quicker. It doesn't introduce anything that causes extra strain or load or awkwardness, and it fits with the greatest diversity and the most kind of wide swath of people's behaviors, attitudes, abilities, and it's like that's kind of like good design to me. And whether anyone asks or not, that's what I try to put in all of them. And sometimes it is something that may not be that visually attractive. It may be somewhat peculiar, but shortly upon interacting with it, you go, "Oh, I see," and then it's and you take it in, and it does not add to the kind of frictional load of your daily life. So with those projects, whether they're software related or not, or physical objects, that's something I try to stick to if I can.
Do you also do software development or software
I,
design?
I do at the level of so I have one software patent, but mostly what I do is at the level of establishing concept and direction. I storyboard them out. I don't do the code per se, but basically develop, choreograph kind of the interaction,
Yeah. Okay.
some UX UI stuff, and then because really it's a you could flip it either way, but it's sort of like that's just another thing we deal with, and our minds are not making a huge distinction whether this is
No, not at
done with
all.
Photoshop or something else, or it's a physical thing. It's like, right, the one is physically richer, but it's no less meaningful, and it needs to follow. Like you can't have to try to do this too many times in a row. It's the same frustration you have with something that doesn't click back on itself and do what you thought it would do. So all that stuff is the same, really, and I deal with a lot of that in a storyboard sense, like it's a
Mhm.
little movie, kind of like here's a flow chart or a tree of events that will happen. You will incur it, and then this could happen. If this happens, then this happens. Da 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 da, and basically plot all that out and apply the same logic. Where it's like I'm trying to bring friction out of the system. I don't want it to over guess what it is you want to do, but I don't want it to like underperform in terms of what, of course, is just you doing this, but it to our minds, to our bodies, it feels the same as like you're, chipping something in concrete or lifting something heavy. We feel a strain, and it's very real, and we'll have that kind of visceral reaction to that. So it's the same kind of thing in a way.
Yeah.
Maybe like a stretch, but I deal with it in a very similar way.
How do you get better at designing things ergonomically, mindfully, with respect to people's time and people's efforts to use something that you actually made?
Mm, I think so. I guess for me personally, it's been a long kind of slow arc where for many years I would say early on I've always brought that to the forefront. They would say we are looking to develop this kind of product. I would say, well, here's some things you should consider. And I don't want to say you would get a blank stare, but people are like, that's nice. Are you going to start on it soon? Like it's not something anyone was asking for. So it's been almost like most of my career is bringing, regardless of what they're asking for, it always applies. And that always just kind of, you don't want to get frustrated, but you just sort of bring it forward again, bring it up. And with certain clients, they say, okay, so why? So this particular product, we executed this way, your recommendation, it's outselling all these other ones. And I would say, okay, well, see, this one, they're at the same price point and everything, but this version, when I see people pick that up, I would say like 60% of the time I see a smile on their face. Or I would say these things that seem almost like a child would say,
Yeah.
but they're very important. And that's because this one does not have the same kind of barriers. It resonates with people. It's relatable, and it has those same features. And so being consistent with that over time is, I don't want to say it's totally like, oh, it's great, I'm good. But it's just been this slow pursuit of bringing a discipline forward that people weren't necessarily asking for years ago. Um, and and then sticking with it, and then really honestly listening to them when they say that's nice, but if it doesn't hit this price point, won't be there anyway. So it has to do everything good design does in the beginning, and then to fall into this, or you mentioned like a mindfulness or a design, mindful ergonomics, I think, which is great.
Yeah, just mindful, just being mindful of someone else, and just not saying, yeah, I don't know, design this, this is going to fit and it's going to work, and then you realize, yeah, but this, when you connect it to your computer, it's kind of like wiggly, and then it's ruining your USB-C connector, socket,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and that's just not mindful. It's that
No,
simple.
it is. It's a lot of. I've always had a back and forth relationship with the design community in general and the art community for that matter, because I feel like a lot of a percentage, not all, but a good percentage of traditional product design brings together like it's like, oh, that's fresh, it has like a recognizable newness, but the devices themselves have kind of a self-centered quality. They're more about them than they are about what they're for. And I always kind of found that to be like a put off, because then later on, like you said, they wiggle out the USB socket. It's like, well, that didn't have to be. I have that exact same connector here right now, and I literally have a piece of blue tape holding it on because I can see you should not put something with a lever, in a USB connector and then put force to it. So it's interesting because I don't know. Early on I thought it's really like a service when you go to do any of these things, and it should be kind of a humble service rather than like, oh, look at this, flat white thing shaped like an ice cube, and it's like, yep, that's pretty sweet, but what, because if you visit other people's homes or see what's actually in the glove compartment of their car, or why they don't wear certain socks, it's like that's the real to all of it. And I always treat it like a sort of, it's just a service. It's just a service. It doesn't, you don't have to pick up anything and say, oh, I know the guy that did that. It's like, that's fine. If you're growing a business, I can see why you would want to do that. But if you're helping people, that doesn't necessarily fit. There's a little bit of a conflict there. Not the worst thing, but it's an honesty kind of element, I guess.
I think it all boils down to that. It boils down to honesty and care and service. Yes, because when you're making something for other people, it doesn't really matter if it's art or if it's design, if it's functional or not, if it's for the purpose of function or not,
Yes,
or it's a utility. Bottom line, it's for someone else.
it is.
And yeah,
Yeah,
I,
yeah, very much so. I agree.
I am I am I am really curious how can a young designer, someone who is just starting out and realizing that they are pretty good at drawing or composition, and they're like, I'm going to study now, I'm going to study and refine these skills. How do they get better at not servicing themselves but servicing a community of people?
Mm.
Like, it seems like you have I can imagine that you have more than 10 years of experience in the field. uh, what would you suggest? How would you approach this? If someone understands, okay, I get it, I am in service to other people, to a certain community,
Mhm.
how do they get better at designing for that community?
Mm. I well, one thought is that, um, and it's not a new idea, but you sort of adopt at a deeper level, if you can manage, you adopt that community, whatever the user group is, like a place that feels like it's centered um, on what you're trying to serve, because it's always there's a crossroads where you bring something fresh to a problem because you don't fully understand the problem. That has this much value, but the
Mm.
rest of the value is in you having lived the problem so much that you don't even need words to describe it. You say, this is what's wrong with this, and it gets, then the space around the solution can open up, and you won't get hung up so much on like, well, if it has a pin in this side, it may be exposed. That's not where your head is at. You're thinking, instead of like, this is what happens with this chair, you're thinking, why do people sit? You back up, you like back way up. And I would say, related to that too, is being able to come back and say whoever asked the question, what client or otherwise, to say like, yes, I understand your question and I see how that's relevant for where you're at, but you need to be back far enough that it's like a flight pattern and you're coming into a city. It's like, I see all the roads, I see the tiny
Yeah.
cars and people and the lights blinking, and I say to myself, is that the right question? And a lot of times I will sort of, it's like a counter offer. I'll go, this is your question. I think your question is actually this, which is, yes, they're related and they definitely overlap, but it gets to that community aspect and just the process of figuring that out, even if it can't be totally resolved, because it sometimes can. Um, it just puts you in a better position to act genuinely and to really act on behalf of what the need was, or the interest, or the people that were trying to solve the problem. Because sometimes the manufacturer, and there are many well-meaning manufacturers, sometimes their interest is to stay a manufacturer and to make stuff fly out the door. They do care about the people they're selling it to because they want them to keep doing what they're doing, but they don't care about them like a parent cares about a child. It's not like that.
No.
So I feel like that's where design steps in somewhat and says, I hear what you're saying, but I also hear what this group of people are saying, and this isn't actually going to answer that. And I've been in situations where I've said, I think your problem is actually this. It seems like this is what's at stake. And they're like, well, thanks for your help. And that was the end of the project. So I kind of shot my foot by saying too much or thinking too far or something. Not often. Usually they'll hear you out. But I say that because it's a little riskier when it's both, it's risky in the sense of new to, like, I need to do this to pay bills, kind of very heavy feeling
Mm.
part of a career path. But when you're young and you're headed towards that, you have all the freedom in the world. You're like a retired person. You're like a young retired person. It's like, do whatever. There's no reason not to back way out and to understand this in its entirety, and maybe find out that it has nothing to do with the product. You need to change, a zoning ordinance in the city. That will fix the problem. It doesn't even have to do with the thing. Um, and being young is actually a fantastic spot to be in, because your mind gets stretched like that. You get conditioned to processing it that way, and then you keep applying it as you go.
Yeah, that's very true. Just last question before we finish. I'm curious because I know that you have quite a bit of knowledge about a lot of different things that I'm really interested in. If you look at the world of synthesizers and
Mm.
synthesizer manufacturers, and like I think that like over probably 300 or 400 different companies, small companies, people like me, like you, building things at home.
Mm.
Um, where do you see this, or where would you want to see this industry go?
Mm. Well, I love the industry because it's like a huge collective of cottage industry type logic, where you take when I look at uh, which is always changing, but my rack setup, I look at it like a little conference of worlds and minds. Here's Latvia next to some places in South America, and that always makes me smile. I would be very sad if it became overly unified, or if people started buying each other, and the industry became more vertical.
Mm,
There'll always be like bigger and smaller players, but none of them will ever be that big, because it's just inherent in the activity. It's an artistic activity. Who's not dripping with money, or who's short on change? Artist. So as long as you're making instruments, you're making them for uh, uh, people with vast amounts of inspiration and skill, and but not necessarily the wealthiest people. It's not something where all of a sudden the market would double. It doesn't feel like that. I love that about that. I wish that the diversity uh, um, and the difference of people's mindsets, and then sometimes opposite places on the world, same exact idea.
Mm.
I love that about the industry, and hope that doesn't ever go away. Um, I do think, though, that keeping everything that we know intact, everything from CV to big clunky pots and stuff, that
Hmm.
tactile quality, the tactile physical quality and object quality, and the fact that it meshes overlapping permutations of the same ideas, I think is such a rich place to play. I love that. That's what makes some people, that just makes some people's eyes bug out, and they're like, oh, I could put 8 voices together, and they're like, oh, and you feel it has that kit quality of ever evolving, ever changing, um, and then references all these physical forms. The thing that would be interesting, I suppose, is further meshing and integrating the rest of the world with it.
Hmm.
So some of the projects I've worked on basically deal with everyday objects that have some data component to them, and your interaction with them is speaking to a generic mesh hub that is not doesn't know it's you, doesn't care. It just sees, it's just like looking at vibration, say. And when I look at, when I that's one thing I think about, is I look at these things and see how they're configured, and nothing is mapped. And people's reactions, like how hard they grip the knob, or are they really, are they like, are they just enthused, or are they jamming, or are they like almost asleep or something? All that emotion back on the physical side of the user is not anywhere. It's not understood, it's not recorded, it's not integrated. So a lot of the stuff that I try to bring from the natural world, whether it's like wind, water, reflection,
Hmm.
subsonic sound, people's emotions, all that stuff, I'm always trying to put into it, but it can also send that back out. And that integration with the rest of the planet, that keeps what is a beautiful kind of outlay of expression and diversity in the modules themselves, keep that intact, but connect with the rest of the world. I think there's ideas, and there's a lot of thought and a lot of interesting methods and methodologies in the industry that actually apply other places. I picture doing other things with it in life, where I'm like, well, why couldn't this be, synthesis oriented? It's like,
Hmm.
well, it could be an aspect, it could be a very strong aspect of sonification. It could be used as feedback systems. It could be other places, but it's kind of its own little island mostly. And it's not that no one else has thought of that. It's just that that's what comes to mind when you mention it.
Yeah, I think when a certain design is informed by the world around it, even if this world is smaller, I tend to go towards saying community, because community is smaller than like a
Yeah,
nation.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and a community does not really have to be constrained to a certain location, especially today.
yeah, yeah, right.
Um, but once you start seeing these things, like a design is informed by a certain community, or design is informed by a certain space, certain natural location, then you get to discover things that you can't really discover when a design is almost coming out of, yeah, just your uninformed brain,
Yeah,
if
yeah,
that makes sense.
it does. It does. I like it. Yeah, yeah. You,
so
you
so yeah.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, once I feel like the more things we get in touch with, the more things we look for empathy everywhere. And I
Yes.
remember I was talking to an artist a while back, and he was like, when you can be empathetical to a fish,
Mhm.
then you can, or to like, he was going further. He was like, just imagine being empathetical to light reflecting on the pavement.
Nice. Yeah,
And my mind blown,
that's
because
good.
it's you can be empathetical to anything. You can draw energy from anything around you, and once you start looking at things around you and not take them for granted,
Yes.
all of a sudden it informs everything you're creating, everything you're doing. You're cooking, it goes there. You're loving, it goes there. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
teaching, it goes
Yeah.
there. You're
Yeah.
designing a thing, it
Yeah.
goes there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then people appreciate it, and it really feels like it's people who try to do things really fast,
Mhm.
like what you mentioned with companies that are just trying to make more revenue.
Mhm.
um, it seems like they're running faster, and that makes sense, and they could sell to a certain amount of people. But it always feels like for the long term, and maybe the long term is not the next 20 years or 30 years, but for the long term, you're not really doing any good. You're just sort of like a cancer thing, trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
like grow on your own just for the sake of yourself.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's beautiful to see actually in the synth. I mean, the fact that I can reach out to people that I really admire in this world, and they will just reply to your email within like a few hours and say, "Oh yeah, let's chat." That is
Yes.
so inspiring.
It
And that's
is.
exactly what you mentioned also, that like you have in your rack all these different um, small universes of communities in around the world that
Yes. Yeah.
create stuff, and you can sort of tap into their little world
Yeah.
that is informed by another world that is different than yours, and then you get informed by this and create something inspired by this, and this is beautiful.
Yeah. It is. It is. Yeah. You're so
So as
right.
long as the industry goes this direction, I'm really really happy.
Yeah. Me too. Me too. You remind me of a point perhaps maybe should have made, but because it seems like a vast collective of small scale businesses, the the normal what like development barriers to getting an idea into other people's hands are not the same at all. So what you have is this kind of expression of creativity and people kind of bouncing off of each other. Nobody thinks, I don't think, that they like are stealing each other's customers or something. That mindset is not quite the same. People are like, here, try one. Um, and um, and also if they think, well, this is kind of a little wonky perhaps, but let's try it. Let's make 50 or 20 or something or 10.
Mm,
Like I make 5 of something. I'm like, maybe that's it. Um, the big companies that have the reach, that makes no sense for them. They would spend more money in 5 meetings than they
mm,
would
mm,
making getting the idea in people's hands. Therefore, you only get the most streamlined, most sort of high bar, high barrier ideas over the wall, so to speak. So you just won't ever see that in a mass scale. But as long as the collective has enough sort of growth and interplay and is healthy, almost like an ecosystem or like an
mm.
organism, as long as it's healthy, cool things pop up all the time. And then what I love about it, like you mentioned, is I get a new module and I start working with it. I'm like, wow, I could have swore it said it was a sequential switch. And I just find the more I work with it, I'm like, oh, that's just not, that's their version of it. That's how their
Yeah.
brain works, you know? And frankly, that inspires me to go further on other things. I think, okay, this graphic display idea is like may only make sense to me and 10 other people, but that's okay. That's doesn't mean I shouldn't try, you know, or it doesn't mean you shouldn't take those ideas and at least, you know, just show the world, see what happens, and have the constant churn of invention and creativity be the force, as opposed to this high bar where it's like, well, if we don't start by selling 10,000, this isn't worth pursuing. It's like, well, that that doesn't bode well for everyone on the receiving end. We
Mm.
just get limited, fits everybody kind of solutions, whatever they are, whatever that may be.
Yeah. I hope this conversation is going to inform some young creative minds to create more wacky, crazy
Yeah, I hope
instruments.
so. Yeah.